what in the world does a poet have to do with this TEDx that talks about environmentalism, sustainability, climatology, ecology, and all those things? And I happen to believe, folks, that poetry has everything to do with those things. And I think that that's why she asked me to come today. And I think that's why she asked me to start out first. Let me say this to you. In thinking about this particular TED Talk today, I was just thinking about how to approach it. Since I'm not an environmentalist, I'm not a climatologist. And so what I thought of, my mind took me back to Greek mythology, to Zeus and Aphrodite, and they would go up on Mount Olympus. And we know in literature that the Greek gods are mythological. They're not real, they don't necessarily exist, but they speak to us. They tell us stories of principles and life and tragedy. And poetry does that as well. And I think that sometimes we as poets think that there are these mythological gods out there that we get inspiration from. We're laying in the bed at night, and before we could go to sleep, a thought or a phrase will come to us. And we'll actually pull out maybe a piece of paper and a pen, and we'll write that down. You'll be driving along in your car, and an inspirational thought would come to you. You'll be watching a movie or listening to a song. You'll see a person walking down the street, and there's something about that drives you to pen and paper. We tend to think that there are these mythological gods. So when you hear me say today, we want to know, what the mythological gods have to say about these particular topics today, these professionals, these scientists who look at these particular areas and bring to us knowledge about what's happening in our world, in our environment, well, we get dispatches. We poets call it inspiration. And I got an inspiration for today. Now, traditionally, what folks are looking for oftentimes is something in spoken word. And in spoken word poetry, generally you got about 3 minutes and you're reciting it from memory. But there was not enough time to actually do that. So I got something from the poetry gods, and I'd like to share it with you. And this is what they sent me. And it's titled, "We Poetry Gods Want to Know," a prose poem. What if there were no birds to grace the sky? No hummingbirds, no red robins, or blue jays appearing wondrous in your eyes? What if there were no fish to swim your oceans and seas? No marlin, no manatee, no whales for tourists to see. How about tiny rodents scurrying across wooded roadsides? Consider cattle and four-footed animals roaming countrysides. What about beautiful lilies populating valleys, roses in multicolored gardens, and the gardenias that grace Billie Holiday's left ear? We poetry gods want to know. Would you write an elegy, pen a letter of lament, issue edicts preserving Earth's environment? Would you be angry enough to challenge the status quo, that sensitivity humans are coming to know? Would you insist humanity persist in turning back the damage derived from climate change? Would you decline it? Or would you toe the line in support of it? We poetry gods want to know. We are dispatching poets all over the world with clarion call to secure for posterity's sake the environment, to stave off climate change in the making. Our poets need nature, ecology, climatology to wax poetic with prosody and poetry. The late, great Maya Angelou wrote and spoke, "I know why the cage bird sings. We, the poetry gods, ask, can you hear the cage bird sing? Can you hear the cage bird sing? She's singing a constant lament for the environment and, without a doubt, climate. From we poetry gods want to know. I think that that's profound, and there's a profundity. I want to let you know that if we don't do things to take care of this terrestrial ball and all of its majesty and all of its beauty, from environment to ecology, nature, climatology, whatever way you want to look at it, if we don't preserve it, me and millions of poets like me will have nothing to work with. The poetry god said, Billie Holiday with the gardenia on her left ear. There are countless number of poems that have been written about that. We hear Maya Angelou talks about, I know why the cage bird sings. Well, the analogy that she's using is to something else, but we can apply it here. There is a cage bird singing. There's a canary in the mind that's saying you need to pay attention. And today, for this TEDx, what has been brought together is scientists and professionals and academics who look at this stuff, they study this, and they come up with new ways in which we can preserve. What a wonderful world. Here's what I need for you to understand on behalf of millions of poets like me. What if there were no hummingbirds? What if there were no red robins? What if there were no blue jays? I have a new chapbook that's just come out, and the phrase, first among beautiful stars. What would it be like if our atmosphere is so clouded with smog that at night I can't look up and see the wonder of the stars in their formation and write a chapbook called First Among Beautiful Stars? We poets work with syntax. We take proper nouns and improper nouns and we arrange them. We take themes and metaphors and we put them in and we organize them in such a way so that when you, the reader, and when you, the hearer, hear it, it speaks to your heart. It speaks to your soul. This is why I love poetry. This is why I believe that there's a nexus between the environment and poetry. Because if we let this escape, if we let this get away, if you look up and we find, I just read somewhere where I think bees, some of you will know this. I'm not an environmentalist. I don't know this stuff, but I do read. I have to read. If I read, I can't write. If these people don't publish and put out papers, I'll have nothing to work with. But I heard that we may lose bees. And they're saying that the loss of bees could have a dramatic impact on humanity. I, as a poet, am here today to make a clarion call on behalf of all poets who I believe would resonate with me and agree with me that what you're going to hear today, give it your most earnest attention. These folks know what they're talking about. They deal with it from an empirical standpoint. And it's powerful. And it's wonderful. And there's nothing like when you hear a poem that talks about things in nature. As a poet, I could be on the Yangtze River in China. I know I'm African American, but I could be an Irish boy in love with Irish girls. I can go back to antebellum. I have something I want to say to you as I get ready to close my time. I have a little saying that's original to me, and that is that I believe that poets are our secular prophets today. Poets are our secular prophets. How can I say that? And I can say that because today we have people who are destroying our world, who take no thought of it, who are exploiting it. And we're living in a day where our political leaders, there's not one enigmatic figure that we look to today that speaks to everybody's heart, that everybody's heart resonates to. Even among our religious leaders. There used to be a time where there were a few religious leaders that most folks, when they spoke, they would rally to. But if you know anything about poetry, if you've heard anything about poetry, if you haven't heard any of these things I'm trying to articulate today, you stand accountable because I told you that throughout the history of humanity, poets, bards, and troubadours traveled countrysides, telling stories, speaking of the environment, inclusive of nature and climate and all of those things. And they did it. And when they did it, they recited it verbatim. And oftentimes, they carried some stringed instrument. And the townspeople or the village people would come out, or they would come to some assembly place, and they would hear the poet talk about all the beautiful things that they come in contact with in the environment. These professionals today, these academics, these speakers, they're going to tell you, I know why the caged bird sings. And I want to be honest, that's referencing something else metaphorically, but I think it can have some application here today. All day long, listen for why the caged bird sings. Turn to your neighbor and say, this is a great day to be here. Have a great day.